Hello, everybody. I am Kara Bunde-Dunn, the host of the Mediums podcast, and today we have Jacob Cooper on the pod. Jacob Cooper is a clinical social worker, a Reiki master, a certified hypnotherapist, and best-selling author of two books, Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. So it is very nice to meet you, Jacob, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kara, for having me on. A big fan of your work and what you're doing, and just great to be here on your podcast today.
Well, thank you so much. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, his books are magic. Go get them, read them. They're amazing. I wanted to talk a little bit. I'm sure you talk about this quite a lot, but you had a near death experience, or NDE, as you say in the book from time to time, when you were a really young kid. You discuss this in length in your book, but I wanted to see if you'd be willing to just share that experience with us and just what that kind of did for the way that you shifted and see the world that we're living in.
Of course, I always love going back to heaven, especially with everything going on. You know, when I talk about my near-death experience, my goal is just for myself to go there, but more importantly, others to join me. You know, so many people wait until their last breath to finally be able to breathe and to enjoy life. And why not embody the understanding of where we come from, where we're headed to, but more importantly, where we're forever connected to in this body and beyond. You know, just the short of it was September of 1993, I suffocated as a result of pertussis. I was at a playground, ironically climbing on a ladder, of all things, a slide, you know, at the age of 3 years old, and I had just totally suffocated. Everything in my body just began to shut down, like as if you're in a basement in a home and you're shutting down one unit at a time. My body just was not able to work, you know, due to the suffocation. And then the last thing I was able to feel was my brain literally just crack in half and snapping in half due to this intense deprivation of oxygen. And it was, to not sugarcoat this, this was incredibly scary, incredibly traumatizing. But also, I do firmly believe it is also why I'm able to have such clear, vivid recall. As we know with trauma, there's potentially a disassociative component where we push it away within our memory, or there's clear recollection of those events. And for me, clear crystal recollections. And you know, when my body was stopped working, you know, I was just had this powerful crossing over experience in which I was able to encounter my guardian angels or spirit guides. I was aware of angels that were all around me, you know, when my body was on the ground in the playground. I was aware of soul family members, people that I was connected to on the other side, as well as awareness of lifetimes that came before this and premonitions of, you know, what would happen. It was filled with incredible seesaw of incredible fear, trepidation, just kind of the lowest possible abyss that you could experience. And then the inverse of that was the most incredible euphoria of my NDE that just had no limitations with how high and how good I felt while crossing over. So it was an incredible pendulum swing of just energies that I was experiencing. But overall, I'm left with a powerful story and living proof, much like the work that you do as a medium, that we go on, we're eternal, we don't die. And so it's something that sticks with me, you know, every day of my life, you know, certainly this NDE that I had.
Yeah, no kidding. Did you feel like you see light, or was it more like, a lot of people that have had near death experiences say they kind of walked into the darkness and then into the light and then they had a choice to stay or go. Do you remember if anything like that happened for you?
All of the above, Kara. You know, it definitely was the most intense darkness that I experienced, and then it was certainly filled with the most light that you could experience as we know it. And I experienced a representation of what we know, of what I know as in our vernacular as God, which was this incredible immaculate palace right behind the right side of my head. But to me, I was able to see incredible colors that were golden and just why I say, you know, and colors is often, you know, discussed in near-death experiences, but it's very hard to use our own descriptive of colors or sounds or anything in the five-dimensional reality. And why that is when you have a near-death experience, um, the colors that we have are really referenced on the colors of the sun. That's the spectrum of colors that we have. When you're having a near-death experience, you're not governed by the sun. The colors or light are really premised on the light of God, the rays of God. And so that those colors are much different than the colors over here. The sensations that you have over here are much different. When you think about it, we're bio-neurochemical, and so like we're almost capped to how good we could feel to a degree in this body. When you're outside of the body, you're in the realm of the infinite. There is no limitations when it comes to the infinite. The heights that you have, the timelessness that you feel, everything is so diametrically different than in many ways of this reality. But we have all these constructs of limitations that really get in the way of understanding some of this stuff. For instance, time. Time wasn't something that I felt on the other side. There was no past, present, or future. I'll say that again. There was no past, present, or future, which in many ways leads to a lot of emotional imbalance. Lao Tzu would say that when you're in the past, you're feeling sad. When in the future, promotes anxiety, but this present is all where contentment and equanimity could be found. And my near-death experience, there's just this one moment of presence, and I was present, and I wasn't worried about what's to happen, what did happen. Eventually, I got to a point where I was just in this timelessness of understanding that all is well, was well, will be well, in the grand scheme of things, which is not something that we're used to. We're used to like bracing for next Tuesday or Wednesday, what's to happen, just the next thing, or what did happen. And so rarely are we in this moment, which is, hopefully a segue where we could really discuss how we can integrate that through a lot of mindfulness practice, and why mindfulness practice is really living with a divine, heavenly mind.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to share something, and then I think we should absolutely segue into that. When my grandmother was passing away, she was very, very sick. She hadn't talked in like a year. She
Mm.
had a very a version of ALS. We'll just call it that. It's a complicated disease. And the night before she passed away, she sat up in bed and said to my aunt, "The grass is so green and the sky is
Wow.
so blue." Like vividly explained the colors that she saw. So it
Wow.
just hit me when you said that. That made me think of that. I hadn't thought of that in a long, long time.
My
Yeah.
God. Wow. And
Yeah.
and it's certainly a more common phenomenon than you'd think, where people, they may be in hospice centers or close to death, and they're having, what's called deathbed visitations, or, lucid kind
Hmm.
of visions, where, you know, and this runs congruently with near-death experiences, where, in a sense, the brain waves are very low, and yet this awareness is quite heightened with NDEs, or people who may be close to death. And so it really speaks to the brain and mind dichotomy, where how we have this higher mind, this higher awareness that goes well beyond the confines of the brain. And just really, the brain is just a filter, not a producer of our life. And so that was a beautiful segment that you shared, but it shows that yes, we have this awareness that goes beyond this brain. It's quite common, and for people who may have family members who are describing that, it is very much real, authentic, and it is quite common. And I educate, I run courses right now called continuing educational courses for people who may work in palliative care centers, or, as we know, hospice care centers, to really understand this phenomenon and just how beautiful of a moment it is, and to not judge it, stigmatize it, other it, and to be able to just allow the family members, to take ownership that this is very authentic and real. And certainly Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who may be familiar with, who really established the five stages of grief, studied near-death experiences as well as, these type of deathbed visitations, and she was just fascinated by these things, and that was a big crux of her works. But yes, these things are quite common, where people will say that there's a crowded room, or people within the room, and they're saying, "There's just me in the room. What are you talking about?" But they'll, you know, because to me, they really have this incubation period where they're not here, they're not really fully there. They're just kind of connected and wavering between the both realms, and it's beautiful to see.
And it does make me think too, having these abilities that I have where I can, connect with the other side. I can do that regularly. I started doing it for myself and then eventually started doing it for other people as well. But it makes you realize that you can, in fact, live your heaven on earth now. Like those moments of lucidness that they have where they're connecting with the other side, we all at some level have the ability to learn how to do that in our human bodies, which I think is kind of what you were getting towards when we talked about segueing to mindfulness and meditation and how can you be in the present. And I truly believe heaven is a state of being and you can live that state of being even in your human life.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many ways to really get to that. But I think some people will feel disempowered and they'll say, "Oh, Jacob or Kara, that's for them, well, but not for me." And the goal for any of these transformative experiences or mediumship work is really to empower others, to remind others that they too have the same type of connection. Everyone could connect in their own way. We just have to get out of our own way. And as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, the quieter you become, the more you could truly hear. So I think that's important, obviously, for our viewers listening to this dialogue, is we all have the ability to really connect. And I don't know about you, but when I meditate, and plenty of people who I know meditate, you just know you get to this place of quiet where you know that there is a part of you that is more than your body, that goes on beyond your emotions. You just know that regardless of what happens, there's just this part of you that's eternal that will go on. And plenty of people experience that sensation that, who you are is far more than just this body, and that will go on beyond the body. And people have that direct experience oftentimes.
Yeah, I always say my body is my least interesting thing about me.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we are a soul having a human experience, and then we go back home to our soul. So you talk about it in your book too, like going back home. And that's really how I envision it too. It's like reconnecting back with your higher self and going back into your soul's or spirit state, if you will. Um, but I do, in fact, do that when I meditate, and I do a form of prayer and meditation and a combination of those things every day. But it really does change my energetic state. It changes the frequency at which I share my light in the world.
Hmm.
And that's what it does for me. Now, for every person, it's a little bit different, but it allows me to get into a higher vibrational state of being or an essence of who I am in my human state. So I don't know about you, but what does that do for you when you meditate?
Unquestionably so. I mean, I could tell you about vibrations from my near-death experience where it just felt like this incredible ascension, and I felt myself vibrating higher and higher where there was no possible end. Oftentimes in our body, we're used to kind of like a cap on how good we could possibly feel. When you're on the other side, there's no end that I felt in my euphoria that I felt. There was no limitation. I just felt myself ascending to this at this infinite rate. And the analogy I have is like going on some people might be afraid of these things, but like imagine going on the fastest possible roller coaster. You're just ascending at an infinite rate, but that's not far away from yourself. That's going toward the innermost doorway of who you are and what you're eternally connected to. So yes, I mean, people talk about vibrations all the time, or songs such as Good Vibrations by like the Beach Boys, but we speak on a very subconscious basis. Our language often reflects greater truths at hand, that we're all energetic beings vibrating at our own pace. And so when you are meditating, you're able to really connect more so with that afterlife frequency and that just higher, plane of awareness. So it's just interesting how when you directly experience this and how that shifts, and it just kind of confirms all these things that you may be reading in the book. The first step is that empirical understanding, but again, the greater step is having that direct experience. Like Karen and I could talk about swimming until we're blue in the face, but until you're in that pool, you really don't fully understand. But it's not like a new form of understanding, as this is all really describing what everyone knows within the depths of their own being. We just have to get out of our own way and remind ourselves how incredible special we are, how broad we all are. Sometimes when we have this limited view, our awareness is also following that. When we have a view that we are unlimited, our behaviors and our awareness will follow that. So belief systems are huge within their ability to really transcend our experiences and transforms of opening that doorway up to possibilities other than which we are experiencing ourselves and how we see ourselves moment to moment.
Yeah, I think, I talk to a lot of different people. I have this ability to want to connect with every type of human on the planet, whether you believe or don't believe.
Mm,
And I tend to find myself in conversations with people that are like, I'm not even, one, I don't believe in mediums. Two, I'm not sure that I even believe in an afterlife.
mhm,
And we get into these deep conversations because I want people to hold space for me. So I hold space for them too.
mhm,
And we often get into this dialogue around energy and emotions and frequency and raising your vibrational state and being in a state of love, peace, calm, joy versus some of those detracting emotions. And that does seem to resonate with people, even if they're not sure that they can fully believe your story, Jacob, even though I 100% do.
mm.
But not everybody can. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Like, if you're somebody that's like, I don't know if I believe in this stuff, do you think that's a good place to at least start, is to think about the energetic vibration you put out in the world and getting to that mindfulness and centered place? Or, what would you say to somebody that's like, I don't know if I believe this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite understandable. We live in a very physical, tangible world, so whatever is in front of us, people will believe. I mean, I have people who don't even believe that mental health is real because it's not tangibilized, it's not real. So there's still maybe a stigma, or just people just don't see it as very valid or true. And it's understandable from a logical perspective. But I think you could also apply logics to all of the research and all the findings of evidence and just different case studies of different pathways to really provide, evidential background to this stuff. But I think there's a big dichotomy between a cynic and a skeptic. And I think what we're trying to get at is a skeptic is a very, valuable place to be in. It's kind of like what my friend Raymond Moody discusses, where everything is kind of like an afterlife, a courtroom of the afterlife, where each person in their own basis has to develop a set criteria of what makes sense as evidential and what makes sense to really move their own needle of what's real and valid and what may be not. I think it's valuable to have that point because, as we know, a lot of times you could be taken, advantage of with circumstances or people that will manipulate your own vulnerabilities and stuff like that. As you know. So, yes, having evidence is key to really having a healthy progression of your own formulated belief systems. But I think the biggest thing is an openness. And so, I look at the planet that we're on. It was a hard set belief system where this is just a flat Earth, and that was a belief system. So if you just held on to that belief system, we could have been, not progressing for, hundreds of thousands of years since that uh, belief system originated. And then some people said, well, that might be the belief system, but it's possible that this is not the case. And let's explore. Let's really expand those bounds. And they were able to discover a whole new world, literally, from that. And so most people, I don't think it's necessarily that they don't want to know. I think a lot of it is fear, where
Yeah.
people will fear what they don't know. And then there's a vulnerability in having to be able to reframe your whole entire perspective of your life and how you see it. So I think it's a combined fear while going out on a limb to having a whole other different paradigm to navigate your life. So I think that incredible transformation holds a lot of people back, but I'm sure you've seen this in your practice where sometimes life has these shake-up periods, such as a loss of a loved one or a different type of experience in your life, which really puts you in a position where either you could go on continuing that belief system and it's a very morbid existence, or you're kind of forced in a way to reevaluate things to make more sense and more meaning when tragedy on a human level comes, at your doorway.
Yeah. I think it was Marianne Williams that said this. I'll have to check, but um, you're either moving towards love or you're moving towards fear, and you can't do
Mm.
both at the same time.
It's very true. And when people talk about near-death experiences, what's the biggest commonality is love that they speak about. Or when there's a medium, I'm sure for you, when you have an evidential medium encounter, it's a loving message that you oftentimes come in with, and it's love that you feel, and it's moving, and it's visceral, and it's real. So love is the DNA of the other side. Love is the DNA of the higher consciousness. And so I think for people to be able to trust in that, to trust in there's a greater intelligence more than my own understanding, requires some degree of humility, but also curiosity in that beginner's mind. And so there's a lot of Buddhist principles that could be helpful for people on any journey, particularly as they're developing a greater extension of consciousness and an expanded box of reality, which it all begins with curiosity, being able to explore, and understanding that it's okay to not know, and that it's okay to really explore and to look at different angles to explore that deeper evolution of knowing that each person could have.
Yeah, my husband is like the king of a million questions in this world because he's a bit
Right.
more of a skeptic, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, and I am like, you know what, babe? I don't, I don't know. Let me ponder that one before I give you some firm answer because that's a very good question. I would say this is a regular Sunday night deck
Mhm.
conversation occurrence for us.
Mhm.
But I do say that sometimes. I don't know. That's a good
Right.
question. Let me just think on that and reflect on that before I answer that. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about this. You're also a therapist, or you're
Mhm.
a social worker by nature, a
Yes.
clinical social worker. How does that work for you to be this type of person that sees the world in this way, and then also trained in a more clinical way? Do you see those worlds connecting?
Mhm.
Do you view those as separate worlds when you're doing like a session, a therapy session with somebody? I'm super curious how that works for you. Or do you let spirit or the energy of spirit just change the vibration of the room?
Mhm.
Do you feel guided by them? How does that work for you?
It was something that I thought was a great nightmare. In my life, doing this therapy work and feeling like I would be boxed in and totally pigeonholed and not be able to integrate any of this stuff has become my greatest dream come true. I say that because, I now train other therapists to understand, and they're now getting continuing educational hours and stuff like that to give them the background to understand this as real and visceral. And so I train therapists in understanding not just NDEs, but other types of transformative experiences, psychic phenomena, mediumistic experiences. And so as a social worker, we're really trained to meet the client where they're at. And so for a client that has mediumistic experiences or psychic phenomenon, what they used to do is they would put you inpatient or in a blue room and label you, as schizophrenic, medicate you, and really just not allow your abilities to take fold because you were so just kind of zombied out and zonked out, and you're so stigmatized. And I just really wonder to myself how many potential other John Edwards or George Andersons or Teresa Caputos out there could we have had we really validated clients having these experiences. Now, it's not to say that there is a difference between psychotic and psychic. There is, certainly, and I highlight that in a lot of my trainings. But I do believe that we have to honor and respect where people are coming from, and certainly as a therapist. Um, let's say you come from, I don't know, like a rural family, and you're one of the many, let's say veterans who commonly have near-death experiences, take up a big, large chunk of the percentage of people who've had near-death experiences. And imagine you're talking to friends and family, and they don't want to hear it. And imagine for yourself, you've had this incredible experience, you're feeling at your lowest. You go into a therapist's office, and they'll say that's not real, it's not valid, and they'll, stigmatize you even further. I mean, geez, that's the exact opposite of anything therapeutic, and you're making things worse rather than better. And so, what I'll say is really my job is to really be that solid piece of foundation with what anyone is going through, to not push them down further when they're drowning, but to be able to really be this lifeguard to help them swim as much as we can, to get them really to thrive with their experience and own their experiences. And so, I don't like come up to clients or talk about anything in my personal life at all. My job is to leave my world behind and enter theirs. But certainly, within therapeutic practice, there's a value of self-disclosure when it's significant to a client, or to use your own experiences with what clients may go through in order to really join and empower what they're going through. And so, from that perspective, it's helpful, as well as understanding of spirituality and how that could really help out clients through existential crises and what they're going through. And so, right now in therapeutic practice, we're integrating a lot of, mindfulness and
Hmm.
Eastern approaches, which back in the day was probably seen as, Woodstocky or hippie or just kind of out there transcendental kind of stuff. But now we're seeing it as therapeutic value. Thank God for Harvard, um, in this regard. But they, not other things, but this regard, they're able to validate, just the brain and how it's shaped through meditation and the real and visceral experience that people could have, with the brain and the different changes that happen within the brain, the neuroplasticity of the brain, the gray matter of the brain. All this stuff is very real, in neurobase. So it's not becoming something out there. It's becoming something real, intangible, and now that's really helping people to take ownership of different spiritual practices in their lives.
Yeah, a good friend of mine works at Mayo Health System, and she is a Reiki master certified, and she's a healthcare professional. She's also a manager of a healthcare floor,
Mhm.
and they're incorporating some of her Reiki energy practices at her clinic, and I think that's pretty
Oh,
cool.
it's I've heard that for years, being in the field of Reiki, and I've heard that for years. That's beautiful that they're doing that. We need certainly more of that. And like anything else, it's like you have to just open yourselves up to it, For I don't know, I'm sure you find this where the people with the cross, the people who come in like the biggest skeptics of the stuff oftentimes become the biggest believers within
Yeah,
time, but you just have
because
to
it
be
shifts
open
them
to
the
it.
most.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. So she did a reading with me, and her team in spirit said, not like she was wondering, is it time for me to like leave the healthcare world and go and do my own practitioner work? And they said, soon, but not yet. You still have
Mm,
work to do. So they were still kind of advising her or nudging her to keep living that life of both, And I think that that's partly why my abilities awakened later in life, because I was in the corporate world. I was a chief sales officer of a company when my abilities awakened within me. And I think that's happens sometimes where we're kind of called to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, or provide some of this work in an area or industry where people are like, oh, I know Kara. She's
right.
just the lady in the neighborhood and she's a sales lady. I don't know. And maybe now she's a medium, I guess. But I sometimes think that many of us are shown this light in a way because we have lived a life where people relate to us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and as we know, as beautiful as what we do is, it, there's a saturation to it in a way, and we're kind of just like speaking to the choir oftentimes, and so that's wonderful and great, but it's oftentimes, being able to roll up our sleeves and to maybe go into some areas where people have not heard of this, or they may be questioning it, and that to me is more rewarding, and you're making more of an impact in a way. So I mean, it's just kind of like supporting like businesses in the middle of nowhere that really kind of need you, versus like going into these congested areas where it's like, all right, what difference do I make? Maybe a little bit, but so to me, I get joy out of doing anything. I think you have a brain, you have a body, you could help out almost anyone, but it's really going to those areas where people just are not, never heard of this stuff, are really new to this stuff. That's what I love about traveling and doing speaking engagements. We're able to kind of meet people. Where I live in Long Island, it's like we're by the water. Like if you're not a psychic, like you don't live here. Like everyone is a psychic here in Long Island, but you go out to other parts of the world, they're totally new to this, and they maybe come from, a lot of pushback from their own, just heightened religious belief systems that they grew up with and stuff like that, and they're able to look at you through a lot more curiosity and openness and stuff like that. And it's great. Whereas here in Long Island, it's like, I don't know. I remember doing like speeches and stuff like that, and people would come up to me like, I actually have to pay for this. Like, I already know all this stuff. Or, it's like, that's what I would get over here. And I'd be like, all right, so that's, I kind of shy away from over here. I do it here and there, but to me, I get a lot more of like a jolt with talking with someone who doesn't know about any of this stuff, and they're totally, curious to it, and you're able to really see the changes that happen to them through that level of curiosity.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. I grew up on a farm in
Right?
Minnesota. So I can
You can
relate to all
relate.
of those things. Oh, yeah. I've had people tell me, call my husband and be like, is your wife in a cult? What's going on?
Right,
Is
right,
she
right.
okay? We're worried about her. Do you want a divorce? What's going on? Is she in a pyramid scheme? She went
Scheme,
to a
yeah.
medium once. Is that lady taking all her money? What is she doing? Why is she charging for what she's doing? That feels wrong. Like, I mean, you name it. I have been through many a conversation with friends, family members, and strangers on the internet.
And within time, people will understand this stuff based on their own levels of awareness.
Yeah,
And I love that analogy where it's like, if you're looking at the first floor of the apartment, you'll see, maybe the bushes and stuff like that and some of the people around you, but you go up to the 10th or 15th floor, you're going to see a lot more details and things. And so as our consciousness increases, our awareness, increases, so to our ability to see and feel a lot of these things increases. And so everyone at their own level is progressing. And, it's like Don Miguel Ruiz, like, it's like, not taking things personal. It's like people are really talking about their own perspective, not where you're coming from oftentimes. And we just kind of plant the seeds, and that person may have pushed back a year from now, 5 years from now, but maybe, that seed we planted may shift them down the road. We just don't know when that's going to blossom within their mind.
yeah, I think that's very true. And I think for people that have known me most of my life, it was a surprise and not a surprise because I've always just been a very loving and generous and helpful person. People come to me for advice all the time or comfort or consultation. But then I think people are like, well, that's not how I know you. That's not the box you fit in. And now you're in a different box and I don't know what to do with that.
Mm,
But I also think that's part of why I'm here is to show people we change and we evolve and we grow and we expand or we don't.
mm.
And
Oh,
why
yeah.
don't we expand
Yeah.
and be open to more possibility and more love?
It's funny how people associate being stagnant with being alive. It's just, you look at Webster's dictionary, what is death? It's like a total stoppage. So while people's bodies may still be here, they're just kind of on these hamster wheels, and there's no change, there's no life. To me, life regenerates itself, it recreates itself, it reinvents itself. And so I don't, whenever I go in a state park, I could go by a beautiful body of water. And, in this waterfall, there's like a stream that's regenerating it, and it's fresh and it's new. I like being by there. Whereas if I go by like the stagnant pond where there's nothing going on, it's off putting, it smells. I just don't like it. And so nature speaks to us in many ways, but we have to understand how beautiful it is to constantly replenish, to regenerate life, how that really is living while we're living, where a lot of times, people are alive, but they're just stuck in their own awareness. And that's kind of where they're at. But that does not mean that life is regenerating itself, that really truly feel, experiencing life in a full degree. And so, if anything, to me, life is always about reinventing yourself, looking at things in a different way, being fresh, being in the moment. And to me, that is true living. So I
Yeah.
think this stuff works in parallel. Not just, you asked me, how do I embody heaven on earth? I think it's really being present, being curious, being open, and regenerating how you look at your life and the nature of reality that keeps us with this eternal mind that we could have and to feel the presence of life itself while we're living.
Yeah, that's amazing. When I do readings for people, if they're really going through a hard time and they're stuck or in indecision,
Mhm.
their team in spirit will show me their feet in cement shoes, and
Mm,
that's their symbol for stuck.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so it's just helping people realize, like, even you and me, we get stuck sometimes. We
Mm,
get caught in the human experience, and it's learning how take curiosity, ask the right questions, learn why you're experiencing the challenges or obstacles that you're learning, or why a human is so triggering for you, a family member or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
It's just learning how to get curious with the challenges of life and see what you're meant to learn and grow from those experiences.
Oh, absolutely. And certainly science, psychology to a degree, it really is based off of, if you look at anything closely enough, there's a deeper explanation, for most things. And science, even now, is you look at people like Albert Einstein, they sound like spiritual gurus and teachers of what they're saying, So, so I think for people, it's just being able to look at things in a closer lens and understanding through that search, you're going to find a lot more solutions in many ways than questions. And sometimes the more you know, the more you don't know from a certain perspective. That could be true as well. But you'll also find, potentially a lot more things, and maybe you weren't aware of a week ago, 2 weeks ago, from really discovering and questioning some of those things in front of you.
Yeah, I have a course called Connecting with Spirit. And one of the lessons within there is around triggers. And
Mhm.
it's in the release framework. It's release, raise, receive. And
Yeah.
so in this release, you're like releasing this limiting beliefs around
Mhm.
triggers. And you talk about it in your book too, individuals that are triggering um, in the wisdom of Jacob's ladder in
Mhm.
particular. And you talk about it being an unmet need within yourself. And I
Mhm.
thought maybe we could talk about that a little bit because everyone can relate to this idea of a person or situation being triggering. And
Mhm.
yet we don't always put the mirror back on ourselves to see like what is it that I'm need to be learning and about myself around why this person triggers me.
Mhm.
So I thought maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think really sometimes we identify life by the stories that are happening to us rather than how really it's just evoking a greater reflection or story within ourselves. And so I think it comes down to this concept that I believe in called the we consciousness, where each person is all connected to. And my friend wrote a book called The We Consciousness Care No We, but really it is really about not seeing someone else outside yourselves, but everyone is a part of this greater role, and we're all interconnected and intertwined. But all of life really just kind of is a mirror of what is going on within to a degree. And everyone plays their own different role within the progressions of those particular healing. And if we could have, again, that spiritual perspective towards that, difficult experience, we could see really it for what it is rather than how it's portrayed on the surface or how we really are processing this through a human level. And again, that's where spirituality could really assist itself within psychology or social, networks in front of ourselves. And so I think, having a greater spiritual foundation is not the bypassing of what we're experiencing in the pain, but it could work congruently with what we're working to and to support it from really looking at it for what it is, not how it's presented at a surface level. But yeah, it's again, not taking things personally and just seeing things as just a mirror of what is going on within and how we could really go to that wound on a deeper level. For instance, if we're not getting validated, oftentimes we will struggle with that ourselves. And it's hard to say what comes first before that. If we grow up, as a child, we're not getting validated. It's hard to learn that skill within this life, certainly. But I think really, if we're looking for things always outside of ourselves, it's oftentimes something within ourselves that's not being addressed. So that's something to bear in mind. I mean, even physically, I've had these experiences where I was totally connected, in many ways. And I had no deeper needs physically. I was just like everything was like an experience, but I remember just being totally aligned and being at a table and I just normally stuff my face with all the stuff is in front of me. But I was totally aligned and connected where I didn't need these things. I just already had it within. And I think for people, certainly external situations and people could enhance our experiences. But when we're connected, it doesn't come out of a need, it comes out of an enhanced ability to experience the energy that we're connected to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think it's just good advice for people too. If something's really hard for you or a person or situation is, try to just get a little more curious with it.
Mm,
Like, is this person triggering because they take up all the oxygen in the room and I'm terrified to speak up? So
mhm,
that's why it's triggering? Or is it because there's part of me that does that too sometimes. Like if that person is evoking a major trigger in you, my hunch is that there's something there that you should dig a little deeper and learn.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
You
kind of
know,
how I think about it.
and that all comes down to self-awareness on a greater perspective, which again, that's certainly neuro-based. They're finding that people who meditate or go into therapy have what's called an enhanced prefrontal cortex, which is all related to self-awareness. And so when anything happens, it kind of lets go of the blame or the anger, and it shifts our awareness towards ourselves and saying, okay, what is going on inside of myself? And that's where the real healing begins. We can't control others' behaviors. That's something we walked into. But what we walk out of it is our ability to really find new meanings of transportation and new pathways of understanding. But we're able to really reflect that mirror back within. Yeah, it's pretty pivotal within our life's trajectory and our growth.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about that because a friend of mine who's also a great spiritual teacher, he said, 90% of spirituality is like aligned to your personal growth.
Mm,
It's like learning, growing, expanding, being better. That's a huge part of a spiritual journey is evolving and growing and expanding into it's never ending. It's not like there's a destination you get to and you're like, I'm enlightened, I'm perfect. At least not for me in this lifetime. That's not the goal. The goal is for me to keep growing and expanding. So,
yeah.
okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about your favorite things. So we're going to switch away from something serious, and I'm just going to rapid fire throw some stuff your way. This is I do with every person on my podcast, and you just tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Your favorite food.
Oh man. Pizza.
Oh, well, there you go. It's a very Long Island answer. No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah, yeah.
Your favorite place to travel, if you could, hop on a plane or go somewhere, where would you want to go next?
When it's not crowded, Sedona.
Oh, I was just there a little bit ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was very
Love it.
lovely. What about holiday? What's your favorite holiday?
4th of July.
Oh, me too. No one says that. No one ever says that.
Yeah, yeah.
I love it. What's your favorite animal, or do you have spirit animals that come around quite a bit? Do you ever get messages from animals?
I'd say wolves and eagles and hawks are some of the animals I connect to. Yeah.
Nice. What about your favorite thing about what you do for a living?
Seeing how people potentially come in lighter, than they walked in to my office or group, and just kind of seeing our interaction and where that may go, down the road, and how that may change their lives for
Oh,
the
that's
better.
nice. What brings you profound joy?
Brings profound joy, finding meaning, and just looking at the world in a different way, and always being curious how I could see things in a better and different way.
Love that. What advice would you give to someone who wants to strengthen their connection with intuition or their team and spirit? Where would you recommend they start, or what advice would you give them?
First thing is to learn self-empowerment, to not put this thing in the select hands of a few, to learn how to love yourself, to be self-empowered, and to remind yourself that you have the ability to connect in your own way, and you are brilliant just as you are. So it comes down to self-love. Self-acceptance is, I think, the first place to start before anything. Because again, you could be doing this stuff and you could be doubting yourself the whole time, and that's going to be a blockage to intuition. I think the first thing is self-love, self-acceptance, and the second thing is being able to surrender to a greater intelligence and awareness that is around yourself, and to trust that awareness. Einstein would say the biggest factor that really defines our life is the universe for us, against us, or ambivalent. And if we're able to really have a trusting universe and a knowing of that, we can really trust in a greater awareness that is coming not from us, but through us. And we just kind of get out of our own way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, how can people follow you, connect with you? What types of things can people do with you? I want people to be able to
Well,
find their way to you. Obviously, I want them to read your books. But what other ways do you show up and serve, and how can people find you?
yeah, they could go to my website, jacoblcooper.com. I'm also on Instagram, Jacob Cooper LCSW, Facebook, Jacob Cooper LCSW. I have a YouTube channel. the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. So those are some of the ways. In terms of specific connections, I do remote or in-person sessions from psychotherapy, hypnosis, past life regression, Reiki, mindfulness, all those kind of stuff. And I do a lot of different seminars and groups, and all that is on my website. So if you're looking for a group or individual, you have a brain, you have a body, we could find a way to really help you out in many ways.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was so delightful to get to know you and dropping so much wisdom on us. I thought it was just fascinating, and I hope that everybody runs and grabs your books and reads them and follows you and connects with you. So, Jacob, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no. Thank you, Kara, for all the wonderful work. And it was just an honor to be in the Mediums podcast here today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.